He collapsed in the courtroom clutching his chest, and everyone rushed to help him. But I knew the truth, and what I did next with those deleted messages changed everything. I'm glad you're here with me today. Stay until the end and comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far my story reaches. At 70 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of deception a person could manage. I'd lived through a difficult marriage, raised 2 children mostly on my own, survived the death of my husband, and built a life from the ruins of broken promises. But watching my son Julian fake a heart attack in front of a judge, paramedics, and his sobbing wife showed me I was wrong. The man I raised, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, had become someone I no longer recognized. And what hurt most was realizing that maybe I'd helped create this monster. It started 6 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. I remember the exact date, March 19th, because it was the day before what would have been my late husband's 73rd birthday. I was in my garden behind my small brick house in Willowbrook, a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside of Portland, Oregon. The early spring air was crisp and carried the scent of wet earth and new growth. I was tending to my rose bushes, the pink promise variety that had been my mother's favorite before she passed away in 2003. My hands were deep in the soil, working in some fresh compost around the roots, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. The sound was unexpected. I wasn't anticipating any visitors that day. My daughter Sophia lived 3 states away in Denver, Colorado, with her husband and 2 young children. She rarely had time to visit, maybe twice a year if we were lucky. My son Julian, well, he'd been too busy with his real estate development company to stop by for anything other than obligatory holiday dinners in recent years. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after being bent for too long, and brushed the dirt from my worn gardening gloves. I walked around the side of my house, past the small garden gnome collection I'd been building since the kids were little, and toward the front yard. What I saw made my heart clench with immediate concern. My daughter-in-law Natalie was sitting in her silver Honda Accord, both hands gripping the steering wheel, her forehead pressed against her knuckles. Even from a distance, I could see her shoulders shaking with what could only be sobs. She was crying, but not the kind of crying you do after a sad movie or a minor disappointment. This was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken inside, the kind that shakes your entire body because the pain is too big to contain. I hurried over as quickly as my 70-year-old legs would carry me and tapped gently on the driver's side window. She jumped, startled, and when she looked up at me through the glass, my breath caught in my throat. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara streaked down her cheeks in dark, messy rivers, and her face was blotchy and raw from crying. This wasn't the composed, elegant woman I'd known for 16 years. This was someone who'd been completely shattered. "Natalie, sweetheart," I said through the glass, my voice filled with concern. "What's happened? What's wrong?" She just shook her head, unable to form words, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I opened the car door carefully, afraid she might collapse. "Come inside," I said gently, reaching for her hand. "Come on now. Let's get you inside." She let me help her out of the car and guide her into my house. She moved like someone in shock, wooden and uncertain, as if she wasn't quite sure her legs would support her. I led her through my small entryway, past the photos of my grandchildren that lined the walls, and into my kitchen with its cheerful yellow wallpaper and the ceramic rooster collection I'd been building since the 1980s. The kitchen had always been the heart of my home, the place where problems were discussed and solutions were found over cups of tea and homemade cookies. I sat her down at my old oak table, the same one where I'd served countless meals to my children when they were growing up. The surface was worn smooth from decades of use, marked with small scratches and water rings that told the story of our family history. I made tea without asking if she wanted any. Strong black tea with honey, the way my own mother used to make for me during difficult times. It was a ritual of comfort, something tangible to hold on to when everything else felt like it was falling apart. Natalie sat silent the entire time, staring at her hands in her lap. I noticed she was still wearing her wedding ring, a beautiful platinum band with 3 small diamonds that Julian had been so proud to give her when he proposed 16 years ago. He'd saved for 6 months to buy that ring, or at least that's what he'd told us. "Here," I said, setting the steaming mug in front of her and sitting down across the table. Drink this slowly. Then, when you're ready, tell me what's happened. She wrapped her hands around the mug as if trying to absorb its warmth, but she didn't drink. Her hands were trembling so badly that the liquid sloshed slightly, threatening to spill. For a long moment, she just sat there, and I waited. I'd learned patience in my 70 years on this earth. Sometimes people need time to find the words for unbearable things, to figure out how to give voice to pain that feels too big for language. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, I could hear birds singing, oblivious to the human drama unfolding inside my house. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Normal sounds of a normal Tuesday afternoon, except nothing about this moment felt normal. Finally, Natalie spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, hoarse from crying. "Margaret, I need to talk to you about Julian. About what he's been doing behind my back. Behind all our backs." My stomach dropped. In that moment, even before she said another word, I already knew. It was a mother's instinct, perhaps. Or maybe just the recognition of a pattern I'd been denying for far too long, refusing to see what had been right in front of me for years. "Tell me," I said simply, keeping my voice calm and steady even though my heart was racing. The story came out in broken pieces, fragmented by sobs and long pauses where she couldn't speak because the words hurt too much. Julian was having an affair. With his executive assistant, a woman named Cassandra Reeves. She was 28 years old, barely older than our oldest granddaughter would be in another decade. Young enough to be Julian's daughter. The thought made me feel physically sick. Natalie had discovered it by accident, the way these things often come to light. She'd borrowed Julian's iPad to help their youngest son Christopher with his homework, something about needing to look up information for a school project about the solar system. When she'd opened the device, she'd found text messages that automatically synced from Julian's iPhone. Messages he'd clearly never intended for her to see. The things he said to her, "Margaret," Natalie's voice cracked and broke. The things he wrote. They were things he used to say to me when we were first married, back when he still looked at me like I mattered. He called her beautiful, special, the best thing in his life. Said he'd never felt this way about anyone before. And there were photos, Margaret. Photos she sent him, and photos he sent back. I can't even describe them without feeling sick. She pulled out her own phone with shaking hands and opened her photo gallery. With trembling fingers, she showed me screenshots she'd taken of the messages before Julian had any idea she'd seen them. I put on my reading glasses, the ones I kept on a chain around my neck, and looked at the screen. And with each message I read, my heart grew heavier and heavier, like someone was piling stones on my chest. "Can't wait to see you tonight at the Riverside Inn. Room 412, like always. I'll bring that wine you like. You're the only thing that makes sense in my life anymore. Everything else feels like an obligation, but you're what I choose. Bought you something special today. Hope you like diamonds. You deserve to sparkle as bright as you make me feel. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about your skin, your laugh, the way you say my name. I wish I could wake up next to you every morning instead of going back to my real life." There were dozens more. Hundreds, Natalie said. Explicit messages that made me blush and feel embarrassed for reading them. Planning messages about secret meetings at hotels, at restaurants, even at Julian's office after hours when everyone else had gone home. Photos that no married man should be sending to anyone but his wife, if anyone at all. And receipts, so many receipts attached to emails that had synced to the iPad as well. Hotel rooms in expensive downtown Portland hotels like the Heathman and the Nines, rooms that cost $300 or $400 a night. Jewelry purchases at stores I recognized, high-end boutiques like Malloy's and Twist, places where a simple bracelet could cost thousands of dollars. Restaurant bills for romantic dinners at intimate, expensive places like Castagna and Le Pigeon, the kind of restaurants where a meal for two could easily run $500 with wine. How long? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. How long has this been going on? At least 18 months that I can document for certain. Maybe longer. Probably longer. Natalie finally took a sip of tea, but her hands were still trembling so badly she had to use both hands to steady the mug. I went through our credit card statements last night, Margaret. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat at the dining room table with our laptop and kept finding more and more evidence going back almost 2 years. Every business trip he said he took alone, she was there. Every late night at the office that he claimed was about closing deals, he was with her. Every time he said he was playing golf with clients on Sunday mornings, it was a lie. All of it, everything, was lies. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning with a combination of anger, disappointment, and a guilt I couldn't quite name yet. The money, I said. How much has he spent? Tens of thousands of dollars, Margaret. Maybe more than that. Money that should have been going to Emma's college fund. She wants to go to veterinary school and that's so expensive. Money we'd been supposedly saving for Christopher's baseball programs and Sophie's art classes. Money for our mortgage, for our future, for our children's futures. He's been spending it on hotel rooms and jewelry and expensive dinners for a woman young enough to be his daughter. Her voice broke again. We've been struggling to pay for things, Margaret. I've been clipping coupons and buying store-brand groceries and telling the kids we couldn't afford a vacation this year. And the whole time, he was spending thousands of dollars on her. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair, I realized. It was about the systematic lying, the financial deception, the way he'd let his family sacrifice while he indulged his selfish desires. It was about him watching Natalie stress over every dollar while he spent freely on his mistress. I confronted him this morning, Natalie continued, fresh tears streaming down her face, leaving new tracks through the dried mascara. I waited until the kids left for school, and then I showed him everything. The messages, the receipts, the photos, all of it. I laid it all out on our kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. She paused, taking a shaky breath, and I could see the pain of the memory crossing her face. Do you know what he said, Margaret? Do you know how your son reacted when confronted with undeniable evidence of his affair? I waited, my hands clenched into fists under the table, dreading what I was about to hear but needing to know. He said I was making a big deal out of nothing. That Cassandra was just a friend, a close friend, but just a friend. That I was being paranoid and jealous and seeing things that weren't there, reading meanings into innocent messages. He said I was crazy, Margaret. He looked me right in the eye, with all that evidence sitting between us, and he called me crazy. He said I needed to see a therapist because I was clearly having some kind of breakdown, that I was imagining an affair where there wasn't one. This was the part that made me angriest, even more than the cheating itself, though that was certainly bad enough. It was the gaslighting, the deliberate attempt to make Natalie doubt her own sanity, her own eyes, her own reality. It was psychological abuse, pure and simple. It was cruelty in a way that went beyond simple infidelity and entered into something darker and more calculated. He's still lying, I said, my voice hard. Even caught red-handed, he's still lying. Yes. And then, when I wouldn't back down, when I kept insisting on the truth, he got angry. Really angry. He said I was trying to ruin his life, that I was being dramatic and irrational, that if I kept making accusations like this, I'd destroy our family. He made it sound like I was the problem, Margaret. Like I was the one tearing our family apart by refusing to ignore his affair. I reached across the table and took both her hands in mine. They were cold despite the warm tea, and I could feel them trembling. What do you want to do, Natalie? What do you need? She looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw something I recognized from my own past. The same look I'd had 35 years ago when I'd finally decided I deserved better than my own husband's lies and long absences. It was determination mixed with fear, strength born from pain, the look of someone who'd been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. I want a divorce, she said, her voice stronger now, more certain. I want custody of my children. I don't want them growing up thinking this is what marriage looks like, that lying and cheating and gaslighting are normal. And I want him to be honest about what he's done, to own up to it instead of making me feel like I'm losing my mind. I want him to face consequences for once in his life instead of talking his way out of everything like he always does. She squeezed my hands tightly. But Margaret, I'm terrified. Julian has money, real money from his business. He has connections all over Portland, all those important people he's always networking with. He'll hire the best lawyers in the state, lawyers I could never afford. And I'm just a part-time art teacher at Emma's middle school. I barely make $25,000 a year. I gave up my career at the Pemberton Gallery when Christopher was born because Julian said it made more sense for me to stay home with the kids, that his income was enough for all of us. He said I shouldn't worry about money, that he'd take care of everything. The bitterness in her voice when she said those last words was sharp enough to cut. He'd convinced her to give up her career, to make herself financially dependent on him, and now that dependence was a weapon he could use against her. I have almost no money of my own, Margaret. No career to fall back on. No savings account in just my name. Everything we have is joint or in his name. And if he fights me, if he really fights me with expensive lawyers and his money and his connections, I don't know if I can win. I don't know if I can protect my kids. I reached across the table and took both her hands in mine firmly, making her look at me. Listen to me, Natalie, and listen carefully. You are not just anything. You're a mother who loves her children fiercely. You're a talented artist and teacher. You're a woman who deserves honesty and respect and basic human decency. And your family to me, do you understand? You've been more of a daughter to me in these 16 years than Julian has been a son in the last decade. I squeezed her hands tightly. I don't care that you're divorcing my son. I don't care what that means for my relationship with him. What Julian is doing to you, to those children, to the sanctity of your marriage, it's wrong. It's deeply, fundamentally wrong. And I won't stand by and watch him destroy you because I'm too afraid to stand up to him. Natalie's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time they looked different. Not tears of despair, but tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope that maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd feared. You'd really do that? You'd support me even though he's your son? Even if it means he might cut you out of his life, out of the grandchildren's lives? He's my son, and I love him because he's my son. But that doesn't mean I'll support him when he's wrong. And Natalie, what he's doing to you, to those beautiful children, it's very, very wrong. I'm not going to pretend otherwise anymore. I've spent too many years making excuses for Julian's behavior, and I'm done. I'm standing with you. What I didn't tell her then, what I couldn't quite admit to myself yet in that moment, was that I'd been seeing signs of this for years. Julian's growing arrogance, his dismissiveness of Natalie's opinions and feelings, his constant need for admiration and control, the way he'd talk about Cassandra just a little too often, with just a little too much enthusiasm. I'd made excuses, told myself it was just stress from running a business, told myself every marriage had rough patches and this was just one of those times. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to examine too closely, I'd known something was broken in my son. Something had been broken for a long time. And I'd looked away because confronting it was too hard, too painful, too likely to force me to admit uncomfortable truths about the child I'd raised. Not anymore. Whatever happened next, however this ended, I was going to face reality. Even if it meant accepting that my son was not the man I'd wanted him to be, not the man I'd raised him to be, and maybe had never been that man at all. Memories of a troubled boy. After Natalie left that afternoon, promising to call a divorce lawyer first thing in the morning, I sat alone in my kitchen as the afternoon light slowly faded to evening shadows. I didn't get up to turn on the lamps. I just sat there in the growing darkness, my cold tea still on the table in front of me, thinking about my son and how we'd arrived at this terrible point. Thinking about all the warning signs I'd ignored, all the red flags I'd dismissed, all the times I'd chosen convenient blindness over difficult truth. Julian Robert Hartwell was born on August 15, 1979, my first child. His father, Robert, had been so proud to have a son, proud in a way he'd never been about anything else in our troubled marriage. Rob was a traveling pharmaceutical salesman, gone more often than he was home, and when he was home, he was usually drunk or angry or both. Sometimes all three at once. But he'd been absolutely thrilled about having a boy to carry on the Hartwell name, as if that name meant something more than a legacy of disappointment and broken promises. I'd loved Julian from the very first moment I held him in my arms at Mercy Hospital in downtown Portland. He was a beautiful baby, perfect in every way, with dark curls and bright blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with intense curiosity. As he grew from baby to toddler to child, he was charming and smart, the kind of kid who could talk his way into or out of anything with equal ease. Teachers loved him and frequently told me how bright and engaging he was. Other kids wanted to be his friend, drawn to his charisma and confidence. He had that indefinable quality that made people want to be around him, want to please him, want to be in his good graces. But there were signs, even then, small troubling signs that something wasn't quite right beneath all that charm and appeal. When Julian was 7 years old, money started disappearing from my purse. Just small amounts at first, $1 here, $2 there. I thought I was miscounting or forgetting purchases I'd made. Our budget was so tight in those days, with Rob's drinking eating up so much of his paycheck, that every dollar mattered. I kept meticulous track of our money, had to. So when $5 went missing, I noticed. When it happened again, I started to worry. Then one day, I found $20 missing from my wallet, a significant amount for our desperately tight budget. That was grocery money, gas money, money we needed to survive. I asked Julian about it directly, sitting him down at this very kitchen table, and he looked at me with those big, innocent blue eyes and said he didn't know anything about it. He seemed genuinely confused by the question, almost hurt that I would accuse him. A week later, I found a stash of candy wrappers and small toys hidden under his bed when I was cleaning his room. 3 Musketeers bars, Snickers, packages of baseball cards, a small action figure, things he couldn't have afforded with the tiny allowance we gave him, 50 cents a week for doing his chores. When I confronted him with the evidence, spreading it out on his bed so he couldn't deny it, he started to cry. He said his little sister Sophia had taken the money from my purse and given him these things, told him they were presents and he shouldn't tell. Sophia was only 4 years old at the time, still mostly speaking in short sentences and believing in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. I knew he was lying. In my heart, in my gut, I absolutely knew. But I wanted to believe him because he was my son and mothers are supposed to believe their sons, supposed to give them the benefit of the doubt. So I did. I told myself maybe I'd misunderstood, maybe there was an explanation I wasn't seeing. I put the candy wrappers and toys in the trash and tried to forget about it. The pattern continued as he got older, the lies getting bigger and more sophisticated. When Julian was 14, he was caught cheating on a history exam at Madison High School. His teacher, Mr. Brennan, called me in for a conference and showed me 2 tests side by side, Julian's and another student's named Timothy Chin. They had identical answers, including the same unique mistakes, the same oddly worded responses that made it clear one had been copied from the other. Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Brennan had said, looking at me over his glasses with a mixture of disappointment and concern, there's no question that one of these boys copied from the other. Given the seating arrangement during the test, and the fact that Timothy is a straight-A student while Julian has been struggling in my class, I believe Julian copied from Timothy's paper. But when I confronted Julian about it that evening, he swore he hadn't cheated. He looked me right in the eye, his voice full of wounded righteousness, and said Timothy must have looked at his paper without his knowledge. He said Timothy was the one who'd been struggling lately and needed to cheat to keep his grades up. He was so convincing, so absolutely certain in his denial, that even I almost believed him even though I knew, logically, that it made no sense. I wanted to believe him. So I did. I went back to Mr. Brennan and argued Julian's case, said my son wouldn't lie to me, that maybe we couldn't know for certain who had cheated. In the end, both boys received failing grades on the exam, and I told myself justice had been served. But I knew the truth. And my son knew that I knew, and that I'd lied for him anyway. 3 days after my confrontation with Julian, Natalie called me with news. She'd found a divorce attorney willing to take her case. Her name was Patricia Chen, a family law specialist who worked at a small firm in downtown Portland called Chen and Associates. Patricia had agreed to represent Natalie on a sliding scale fee arrangement, taking into account her limited income as a part-time art teacher. "Can you come with me to the initial consultation?" Natalie asked over the phone. Her voice still carried that tremor of uncertainty, the sound of someone who'd had their confidence systematically destroyed and was trying to rebuild it piece by piece. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I need someone there who knows the whole history, someone who can help me remember everything clearly. Julian always says I exaggerate or misremember things, and I'm afraid I'll do that with the lawyer too." "Of course I'll come," I said immediately. "When is the appointment?" "Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Her office is in the Morrison Building on 3rd Avenue. The next afternoon, I put on my best dress, a navy blue one I usually reserved for church, and drove into downtown Portland. I met Natalie in the lobby of the Morrison Building, a renovated historic structure with beautiful old architectural details. She looked thin and tired, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't been sleeping well. She was wearing a simple gray pantsuit and minimal makeup, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked small and vulnerable, nothing like the confident young woman who'd married my son 16 years ago. We took the elevator to the 5th floor and found Shen and associates at the end of a quiet hallway. The office was modest but professional, with comfortable waiting room furniture and artwork on the walls that featured local Portland landscapes. A receptionist greeted us warmly and told us Patricia would be ready in just a few minutes. Patricia Chen turned out to be a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes behind designer glasses and an air of competent authority. Her handshake was firm, and she led us into her office with efficient grace. The space was lined with law books and file cabinets, and her desk was organized but clearly well used, papers stacked neatly in various trays. "Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Hartwell, please sit down," Patricia said, gesturing to 2 comfortable chairs across from her desk. "I've reviewed the preliminary information Natalie provided over the phone, but I'd like to hear the full story from the beginning. Take your time, don't leave anything out, and please know that everything discussed in this room is completely confidential." Natalie took a deep breath and began to tell the story again. The discovery of the messages on the iPad. The 18 months of documented affair with Cassandra Reeves. The hotel receipts and jewelry purchases totaling tens of thousands of dollars. The gaslighting when she'd confronted Julian, his insistence that she was crazy and seeing things that weren't there. The financial strain the family had been under while Julian spent freely on his mistress. Patricia took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. What were the exact dates of the hotel stays? Did Natalie have copies of all the financial records? Were there witnesses to any of Julian's behavior? Had he ever been physically violent or threatening? I watched Patricia's expression as Natalie talked, and I saw her jaw tighten with each new detail. She'd clearly handled many divorce cases, but there was something about Natalie's story that seemed to affect her more than professional detachment would normally allow. "And your mother-in-law is here supporting you through this?" Patricia asked, glancing at me with what looked like respect. "That's actually quite unusual in my experience. Usually, mothers side with their sons regardless of the circumstances." "Margaret has been my rock through all of this," Natalie said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "She's the only family I have who believes me. My own parents passed away years ago, and Julian has been very effective at isolating me from most of our friends." "Tell me about that isolation," Patricia said, leaning forward with increased interest. "How did that happen?" Natalie explained how, over the years, Julian had gradually convinced her to spend less time with her friends from the art world. He'd said they were a bad influence, that they encouraged her to be selfish and think about her own needs instead of her family. When she'd wanted to have dinner with her college roommate who was visiting from Seattle, Julian had gotten angry and said she was neglecting the children. When she'd been invited to join a book club with other mothers from the kids' school, he'd made her feel guilty for wanting time away from home. "He made it seem like every friendship I tried to maintain was a betrayal of him and the kids," Natalie explained, her voice shaking. "He'd say things like, 'I guess I'm just not enough for you,' or 'I work all day to support this family, and you want to go out with friends instead of spending time with me.' It got easier to just stop trying to maintain friendships than to deal with the guilt and arguments." Patricia nodded grimly. "Classic isolation tactics. It's a form of emotional abuse designed to make you dependent on him and cut off from potential support systems. The good news is that this pattern of behavior strengthens your case. The bad news is that someone who's willing to use these tactics will likely fight very dirty in a divorce. He's already hired Marcus Thornton, Natalie said quietly. Patricia's expression darkened. Thornton. Of course he did. She set down her pen and looked at Natalie seriously. I'm going to be honest with you, Natalie. Marcus Thornton is one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the state. He's known for scorched earth tactics, for destroying opposing parties through any means necessary. His clients are usually very wealthy, and they pay him extremely well to win at any cost. This isn't going to be easy. Can you still help her? I asked, speaking up for the first time. Even against someone like that? Patricia looked at me, then back at Natalie. Yes, I can help. But you need to understand what you're up against. Thornton will try to paint you as an unfit mother. He'll dig into your past looking for anything he can use against you. He'll probably hire a private investigator to follow you, hoping to catch you doing something that can be twisted to make you look bad. He'll drag this out as long as possible, running up legal bills that he knows you can't afford, hoping you'll give up or settle for less than you deserve. Natalie's face had gone pale. I don't have much money for a long legal battle. Julian controls most of our finances. I know. That's why we're going to move quickly and strategically. First, we're filing for divorce immediately and requesting temporary orders for child support and spousal support. You're entitled to financial support during the divorce proceedings, and we're going to make sure you get it. Second, we're going to request temporary custody arrangements that favor you as the primary caregiver, which you clearly are. Third, we're filing a motion to freeze all joint accounts and credit cards to prevent Julian from hiding or wasting marital assets. Patricia pulled out a fresh legal pad and started making a list. I need you to gather every piece of documentation you can find. Bank statements, credit card bills, tax returns, mortgage documents, retirement account statements, everything. I need a list of all marital assets, the house, cars, Julian's business, any investments or savings accounts. I need documentation of his affair, those text messages, emails, photos, hotel receipts, jewelry store receipts, anything that proves the relationship and the money he spent. And I need a detailed accounting of the children's schedules, their medical needs, their school activities, everything that shows you're the primary caregiver. Natalie nodded, taking notes on her own phone. I can do that. I've already started organizing a lot of it. Good. One more thing, and this is important. Patricia looked at both of us seriously. From this moment forward, all communication between you and Julian should go through the lawyers. Don't talk to him about the divorce, don't respond to his texts or emails about anything other than immediate parenting issues with the children, and absolutely don't let him manipulate you into private conversations where he can try to gaslight you or make you feel guilty. Everything needs to be documented and professional. He's going to try to contact me, Natalie said with certainty. He's going to try to convince me to drop this, or to negotiate directly without lawyers. And you're going to ignore those attempts and refer him to me. Every single time, no matter what he says or promises. Patricia handed Natalie her business card. My cell phone number is on there. If Julian contacts you and says anything threatening, anything that makes you feel unsafe, or anything that seems like witness intimidation, you call me immediately. Day or night, I don't care. This is important, Natalie. Do you understand? I understand. Patricia turned to me. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm glad you're supporting your daughter-in-law through this. But I need to warn you that your son is likely going to put pressure on you too. He may try to use your relationship with your grandchildren as leverage. He may make threats or promises designed to get you to convince Natalie to back down. You need to be prepared for that. I'm prepared, I said firmly. I've already told Julian where I stand. I'm not changing my mind. We left Patricia's office an hour later with a clear plan of action and a stack of documents to fill out. Natalie seemed stronger than when we'd arrived, bolstered by having a professional advocate in her corner. As we stood by our cars in the parking garage, she hugged me tightly. Thank you for coming with me today, she said. I don't think I could have done that alone. You're not alone, I assured her. We're going to get through this together. But as I drove home through Portland's afternoon traffic, I couldn't shake Patricia's warning about what was coming. Julian was going to fight dirty. And I had no idea just how dirty he was willing to get. The first legal strikes. Patricia moved quickly. Within 3 days, she had filed the divorce petition with the Multnomah County Court, along with motions for temporary custody, child support, spousal support, and the freezing of marital assets. Julian was served with the papers at his office by a professional process server on a Friday afternoon. The explosion came exactly 2 hours later. I was making dinner, just some chicken soup and cornbread, when my phone rang. Julian's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. How could you? His voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. How could you help her do this to me? Julian, calm down. Calm down? She just had me served with divorce papers at my office, Mom. At my office. In front of my staff, in front of clients who were there for a meeting. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Do you have any idea what this does to my professional reputation? Maybe you should have thought about your reputation before you started having an affair with your assistant, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. There was a brief silence, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Colder. More controlled. You don't understand what you've done. You think you're helping her, but you're just making everything worse. For everyone, including those kids you claim to care so much about. The kids will be fine. They have a mother who loves them and wants to protect them. And a grandmother who's helping their mother destroy their father. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Did you see what she's asking for? Full custody. The house. Child support. Spousal support. She wants to take everything, Mom. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built. She's asking for what she's entitled to. She gave up her career to raise your children while you built your business. She deserves fair compensation for that sacrifice. Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fair compensation. Is that what you call trying to destroy my life? Well, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to fight her on every single point. Custody, assets, support, everything. And by the time this is over, she's going to wish she'd never filed these papers. Julian, please don't do this. Think about Emma and Christopher and Sophie. Think about what a bitter custody battle will do to them. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking about protecting them from a mother who's unstable and vindictive. I'm thinking about making sure they don't grow up believing that it's okay to make false accusations and try to destroy someone's life just because you're unhappy. They're not false accusations. You had an affair. You spent tens of thousands of dollars on another woman while your family struggled. That's her version of events. And you've chosen to believe her over your own son. You know what, Mom? I don't think you should come around the kids for a while. Not until you can be rational about this situation and stop poisoning them against their father. The threat was clear and deliberate. He was cutting me off from my grandchildren, using them as weapons in his war against Natalie. You can't do that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. I have a right to see my grandchildren. Actually, I can. I'm their father, and I get to decide who has access to them. And someone who's actively working to destroy their family? That's not someone I want around my kids. He paused, letting that sink in. You made your choice, Mom. Now you get to live with the consequences. He hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, soup forgotten on the stove, and felt tears of frustration and anger sliding down my cheeks. He was using the children as hostages, trying to force me to abandon Natalie by threatening to cut me off from Emma, Christopher, and Sophie. But I'd meant what I said to Natalie. I wasn't backing down. Even if it cost me my relationship with my son, even if it meant not seeing my grandchildren for a while, I wasn't going to stand by and watch him destroy an innocent woman just because he could. I called Natalie immediately and told her about Julian's threat. I was afraid of this, she said, her voice tired. He's already started with me too. He sent me about 20 text messages in the last hour, saying I'm destroying the family, that the kids will hate me for this, that I'm being selfish and vindictive. Patricia told me not to respond, to just save everything for documentation. Good. Don't respond. Don't let him manipulate you. Margaret, I'm so sorry he's threatening to keep you from the kids. That's not fair to you or to them. Don't worry about me. We'll get through this. Patricia said it would get ugly, and she was right. But ugly doesn't mean we give up. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated rapidly. Marcus Thornton filed a response to the divorce petition that was 40 pages long and read like a character assassination disguised as a legal document. According to the response, Natalie was an unfit mother who neglected her children in favor of her own interests. She was emotionally unstable, prone to dramatic overreactions, and possibly suffering from mental health issues that made her unable to properly care for 3 children. The allegations were specific and cruel. Natalie had allegedly left the children alone multiple times to meet with friends. She had a bad temper and yelled at the kids frequently. She was irresponsible with money, spending on art supplies and personal indulgences while neglecting household needs. She had been the one having an inappropriate relationship, not Julian, with a man she'd met at the school where she taught. Every single allegation was a lie, but they were lies crafted carefully to sound plausible. Patricia explained that this was standard Thornton strategy, throw out dozens of accusations knowing most wouldn't stick, but hoping enough mud would stick to damage the opposing party's credibility. We're going to respond point by point with documentation and witness statements, Patricia told us during an emergency meeting at her office. But I need you to prepare yourself, Natalie. This is only the beginning. It's going to get worse before it gets better. She was right. Within days, Natalie noticed a car following her. A black sedan with tinted windows that appeared behind her when she left the house and followed her to the grocery store, to the kids' school, to my house when she came to visit. The private investigator Julian had hired wasn't even trying to be subtle. He's trying to intimidate you, Patricia explained when Natalie reported it. He wants you to feel watched and pressured. It's psychological warfare. My advice is to ignore it and continue living your life normally. Don't give him anything he can use. But how do you live normally when you know you're being watched and documented? When you know that every move you make might be twisted and used against you in court? Natalie started second-guessing everything. Should she stop for wine at the grocery store, or would that be documented as evidence of a drinking problem? Should she meet a friend for coffee, or would that be presented as evidence she was neglecting her children? Should she get her hair done, or would that be used as proof she was wasteful with money? The stress was taking a visible toll. Natalie lost more weight. The dark circles under her eyes deepened. She started having anxiety attacks, her breath coming short and her heart racing at random moments. Patricia recommended a therapist, both to help Natalie cope with the stress and to have a professional who could testify that she was proactively managing her mental health. Meanwhile, Julian was playing the role of the wronged husband to perfection. He posted on social media about how much he missed his kids during Natalie's parenting time. He showed up at Emma's school play and Christopher's baseball game with Cassandra on his arm, making sure everyone saw what a devoted father he was. He told anyone who would listen that he was heartbroken about the divorce, that he'd tried everything to save his marriage, but Natalie had become impossible to live with. The children were caught in the middle, confused and hurting. Emma, at 14, was old enough to understand that something was very wrong, but too young to fully process the adult complexities of what was happening. She started having trouble sleeping and her grades began to slip. Christopher became withdrawn and spent hours alone in his room. Sophie, only 8 years old, started having nightmares and asking when Daddy was coming home to stay. I tried to see the kids, but Julian blocked every attempt. When I showed up at his apartment, he wouldn't answer the door even though I could hear the children inside. When I tried to pick them up from school, the school secretary told me I'd been removed from the approved pickup list. When I called to talk to them, Julian either wouldn't answer or would say they were busy and couldn't come to the phone. The only way I could maintain any connection was through Natalie during her parenting time. She would bring them to my house for visits, and I would treasure those few hours with my grandchildren, trying to provide some stability and normalcy in their disrupted world. But I could see the toll it was taking on them, and it broke my heart. 6 weeks after the divorce filing, we had our first court hearing for the temporary orders. This was my first time seeing Julian face to face since our phone confrontation, and I was shocked by how much he'd changed. He'd lost weight and looked gaunt. There were dark circles under his eyes, though I suspected those were as much from stress as from any genuine remorse. He wore an expensive suit and sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus Thornton, who was exactly what I'd expected, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair, an expensive suit, and the predatory air of someone who enjoyed combat. Julian didn't look at me or Natalie when we entered the courtroom. He kept his eyes straight ahead, his jaw set in a hard line. But I could feel the anger radiating off him, a palpable force in the quiet courtroom. The hearing was brutal. Marcus Thornton painted a picture of Natalie as an unstable, neglectful mother who was using the children as pawns in a vindictive attack on their father. He brought up the allegations from his response, presented them as established facts, and demanded that Julian receive primary custody to protect the children from their mother's instability. Patricia countered with evidence of Julian's affair, documentation of the money he'd spent on Cassandra, and testimony about his pattern of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. She presented statements from the children's teachers saying Natalie was an involved, caring mother who never missed a parent-teacher conference or school event. She showed the judge text messages where Julian threatened and berated Natalie, revealing his true character. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Sandra Morrison, listened to both sides with an expression of weary patience that suggested she'd seen this same drama play out countless times before. When both lawyers had finished their arguments, she looked at Julian and Natalie over her reading glasses. "I'm granting temporary shared custody with a 50-50 parenting time split," she said. "Neither parent has shown evidence of being unfit at this time. Mr. Hartwell, you will pay temporary child support in the amount of $2,800 per month based on your income and the number of children. You will also pay temporary spousal support of $1,500 per month. Mrs. Morrison will remain in the marital home with the children, and Mr. Hartwell will continue to reside in his current apartment. All marital accounts will be frozen except for the minimum necessary to maintain the household and pay ordinary expenses. We'll reconvene in 3 months for a status conference." She banged her gavel, and it was over. A temporary truce, not a victory for either side, but at least Natalie had some financial support and the children had a stable living arrangement. As we left the courtroom, I finally made eye contact with Julian. He was staring at me with an expression of cold fury that made me take a step back. In that moment, he didn't look like my son. He looked like a stranger who wanted to hurt me. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently across the courthouse hallway. And I knew with absolute certainty that he was right. This was only the beginning of a war that would get much uglier before it ended. In Part 2, the divorce proceedings began with Patricia Chen as Natalie's attorney facing off against Marcus Thornton, Julian's aggressive lawyer. Julian retaliated by filing false allegations against Natalie, hiring a private investigator to follow her, and cutting me off from my grandchildren. The first court hearing resulted in temporary shared custody and support payments. But Julian made it clear this war was far from over. Today, I'm sharing how a sleepless night and my own curiosity led me to discover secrets that changed everything. The sleepless night. It was 2:47 in the morning when I gave up trying to sleep. I'd been lying in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything that had happened in the past 2 months. The divorce filing. The court hearing. Julian's threats. The look on little Sophie's face the last time I'd seen her, when she'd asked me why Daddy said I couldn't come to her dance recital anymore. I got out of bed, put on my robe, and went to the kitchen to make chamomile tea. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I sat at my kitchen table with my steaming mug and tried to quiet my anxious thoughts. But one thought kept returning, persistent and nagging. Something Patricia had said during our last meeting kept echoing in my mind. In cases like this, when someone fights this hard and this dirty, they're usually protecting something bigger than just their ego. People don't wage scorched earth campaigns over simple divorces. They do it when they have something to hide. What was Julian hiding? Yes, there was the affair with Cassandra, but that was already exposed. The text messages, the hotel receipts, the jewelry purchases, all of that was documented and submitted to the court. So why was he fighting so viciously? Why hire the most expensive, aggressive attorney in Portland? Why spend what must be tens of thousands of dollars on legal fees to avoid paying support to his own children? The math didn't make sense. Even with his successful real estate development company, the legal bills alone must be crushing. Marcus Thornton didn't come cheap. I'd heard Patricia mention that attorneys like him charged $500 to $700 per hour, and Julian's case had already generated hundreds of billable hours. Where was that money coming from? I got up and went to my small home office, really just a converted second bedroom with a desk and filing cabinet. I turned on my old desktop computer and waited for it to boot up. The blue glow of the monitor was the only light in the dark house. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I started with a simple Google search, Julian Hartwell Real Estate Development Portland. Pages of results came up. His company website, Hartwell Development Group. Articles in local business journals about various projects. A profile in Portland Monthly from 2 years ago calling him one of Portland's rising stars in commercial development. I clicked on the company website. It was slick and professional, with photos of completed projects, an office building in the Pearl District, a mixed-use development in Northwest Portland, a luxury apartment complex in Lake Oswego. The About page featured a professional photo of Julian in a suit, looking confident and successful, with a biography that highlighted his 15 years of experience and commitment to transforming Portland's urban landscape. I clicked through the portfolio of projects, looking at each one carefully. Something was nagging at me, a feeling I couldn't quite name. Then I noticed something odd. Several of the projects listed as completed had dates that didn't make sense. The Riverside Commons project, for example, was listed as completed in 2023, but I distinctly remembered Julian telling the family at Christmas dinner that year that the project was delayed due to permitting issues and wouldn't break ground until the following spring. I opened a new tab and searched for Riverside Commons Portland. The first result was an article from the Portland Tribune dated April 2024, Riverside Commons project stalled, investors question timeline and budget overruns. I read the article with growing concern. According to the Tribune, the Riverside Commons project, a planned luxury condominium development along the Willamette River, had been funded by a group of private investors who'd contributed over $8 million. But 2 years into the project, there was almost nothing to show for it. The land had been purchased, but construction had barely begun. The investors were questioning where their money had gone and why the project was so far behind schedule and over budget. Julian was quoted in the article, "These concerns are completely unfounded. Development projects of this scale always face unexpected challenges and delays. We're committed to delivering a world-class development that will exceed our investors' expectations. The delays are temporary, and we remain on track for completion." But if the article was from April 2024 and it was now September, what was the current status? I searched for more recent articles and found one from just 3 weeks ago in the Willamette Week. Riverside Commons investors file complaint with State Business Registry, allege misuse of funds. My hand started trembling as I read. A group of investors had filed a formal complaint alleging that Julian had misappropriated development funds for personal use. They claimed he'd diverted money meant for construction into other projects and personal expenses. They were demanding a full accounting of how their $8 million investment had been spent. Julian's response, through his business attorney, denied all allegations and called the complaint a coordinated attack by disgruntled investors who don't understand the complexities of large-scale development. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. Misappropriation of funds. That was a polite way of saying theft. If these allegations were true, Julian wasn't just a cheating husband. He was potentially a criminal who'd stolen millions of dollars from investors. I kept searching, diving deeper into the rabbit hole. I found more articles, more projects with similar patterns. The Cascade Heights development, funded by investors, delayed indefinitely, investors threatening legal action. The Morrison Street Towers, millions in investor funds, minimal progress, questions about where the money went. The Pearl District renovation, lawsuits filed by contractors claiming they hadn't been paid for work completed months ago. A pattern was emerging, and it was ugly. Julian appeared to be running what amounted to a pyramid scheme, taking money from new investors to pay off old ones, diverting funds to cover personal expenses, and leaving a trail of angry creditors and investors in his wake. I found the Oregon Secretary of State's business registry and looked up Hartwell Development Group. The company had been registered in 2009, with Julian as the sole owner and director. But there were liens filed against the company. Multiple liens, totaling over $2.3 million, from contractors, suppliers, and other creditors claiming unpaid debts. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A notice from the Oregon Construction Contractors Board dated 2 months ago, right around the time Natalie had filed for divorce. Julian's contractor's license was under review for alleged violations of financial responsibility requirements and misrepresentation to clients. There was going to be a hearing in November to determine if his license should be suspended or revoked. If Julian lost his contractor's license, he couldn't legally work on development projects in Oregon. His entire business would collapse. And if the investor's allegations were proven true, he could face criminal charges for fraud and theft. Suddenly, everything made sense. The vicious divorce battle wasn't just about ego or custody of the children. It was about money. Specifically, it was about protecting whatever assets he had left from creditors and investigators. If he could prove that Natalie was an unfit mother and minimize his support obligations, he could keep more of his money hidden and protected. If he could drag out the divorce proceedings, he could buy time to shuffle money around, hide assets, maybe even flee the jurisdiction if things got bad enough. The affair with Cassandra, the humiliation of being served with divorce papers, the court hearings, all of that was secondary to the real problem. Julian's business empire was built on fraud, and it was crumbling around him. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd been researching for over 2 hours, and I'd barely scratched the surface. But I knew enough to understand that this information needed to get to Patricia Chin immediately. This changed everything about the divorce case. Sharing the discovery. I called Patricia's office as soon as it opened at 9 a.m. The receptionist tried to tell me Patricia was booked solid all day, but I insisted it was an emergency related to the Morrison case. Tell her Margaret Hartwell has discovered information about Julian's business that she needs to see immediately. Tell her it involves investor fraud and criminal activity. That got me a call back within 10 minutes. Mrs. Hartwell, what's this about investor fraud? Patricia's voice was sharp and alert. I couldn't sleep last night, so I started researching Julian's business online. Patricia, I think he's been defrauding investors for years. There are multiple projects where millions of dollars have disappeared, liens filed against his company, complaints with state agencies, and his contractor's license is under review. I think the divorce battle isn't really about Natalie or the kids at all. It's about protecting whatever money he has left. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, can you come to my office today? Bring everything you found. Every article, every document, every link. This could be exactly what we need. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Patricia's office with Natalie, spreading out printed articles and documents across the conference table. Patricia read through everything carefully, occasionally making notes on her legal pad or pulling up additional information on her laptop. This is significant, she said finally, looking up at both of us. Very significant. If Julian is facing potential criminal charges for investor fraud, it explains the aggressive legal strategy. He's trying to preserve assets and maintain control over his financial situation before everything falls apart. Can we use this in the divorce case? Natalie asked. Her voice was hopeful but cautious, as if she was afraid to believe this might actually help her. Absolutely. This goes directly to the issue of marital assets and his ability to pay support. If he's been misappropriating business funds, some of that money might be hidden marital assets. If he's facing criminal charges, the court needs to know about his financial situation and potential legal liabilities. Patricia started making a list. We need to subpoena his business records, all of them. Bank accounts, contracts with investors, project budgets, everything. We need to depose these investors who filed complaints. And we need to notify the court that there are potential criminal proceedings that could impact the divorce. Won't Marcus Thornton fight the subpoenas? I asked. Oh, he'll fight like hell. But the beauty of this is that it's not just our investigation anymore. The state regulatory agencies are already investigating. The investors have already filed complaints. We're just connecting the dots and making sure the family court judge understands the full picture of Julian's financial situation. Patricia looked at Natalie seriously. This could get very complicated very quickly. If Julian is charged criminally, the divorce might get delayed while those proceedings happen. But it also means we have leverage. A man facing potential fraud charges can't afford to look like he's hiding assets or refusing to support his children. The optics would be terrible for him, both in family court and in criminal court if it comes to that. What do we do now? Natalie asked. Now I do what I do best, aggressive discovery. I'm going to file motions to compel production of all of Julian's business records. I'm going to request an emergency hearing to modify the temporary orders based on newly discovered information about his financial fraud. And I'm going to make sure Marcus Thornton and Judge Morrison understand that we know exactly what Julian is trying to hide. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a particularly kind smile. Your son picked the wrong family to mess with, Mrs. Hartwell. He should have been honest from the start. Now he's going to face the consequences of his lies, both in divorce court and potentially in criminal court. The business records battle. Patricia filed her motions the next day. The response from Marcus Thornton was swift and furious. He filed an emergency motion to quash the subpoenas, arguing that Julian's business records were confidential, protected by privacy laws, and completely irrelevant to the divorce proceedings. The hearing on the competing motions was scheduled for the following week. This time, when we arrived at the courthouse, there was a different energy in the air. Julian looked haggard and stressed. He'd lost more weight, and there was a nervous energy about him that hadn't been there before. Marcus Thornton, by contrast, looked coldly professional as always, but I thought I detected a hint of concern in his eyes. Judge Morrison listened to both sides present their arguments. Marcus Thornton insisted that Patricia was on a fishing expedition, trying to dig up dirt that had nothing to do with the legitimate issues in the divorce. Your Honor, Mrs. Morrison is attempting to weaponize unproven allegations about Mr. Hartwell's business dealings to gain an unfair advantage in these proceedings. The business records she's requesting are confidential, proprietary, and completely irrelevant to issues of custody and support. This is harassment, pure and simple, designed to embarrass my client and drive up his legal costs. Patricia stood to respond, and her voice was calm but firm. Your Honor, Mr. Hartwell's business dealings are absolutely relevant to this case. He claims he cannot afford to pay adequate support to his wife and children. He claims his business is struggling due to normal market conditions. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Mr. Hartwell appears to have diverted millions of dollars in investor funds for personal use, including spending tens of thousands of dollars on his mistress while claiming poverty to this court. The court has a right and an obligation to understand his true financial situation before making orders about support and asset division. She placed a stack of documents on the table. I've provided the court with articles documenting complaints filed against Mr. Hartwell's company by multiple investors. I've provided notice of the pending review of his contractor's license by the State Regulatory Board. I've provided evidence of multiple liens filed against his business. This isn't a fishing expedition, Your Honor. This is a legitimate attempt to pierce through Mr. Hartwell's financial obfuscation and determine the true value of marital assets and his actual ability to pay support. Judge Morrison picked up the documents and read through them silently. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of papers rustling. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I watched him from my seat in the gallery and saw sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. Finally, Judge Morrison looked up. Mr. Thornton, these allegations are serious. If there's even a possibility that Mr. Hartwell has been hiding marital assets or misrepresenting his financial situation to this court, I need to know about it. I'm granting Mrs. Chen's motion to compel production of business records, but I'm limiting the scope to documents directly related to the financial condition of Hartwell Development Group and Mr. Hartwell's personal compensation and draws from the business for the past 3 years. Mr. Hartwell, you have 30 days to produce these documents. Marcus Thornton stood quickly. Your Honor, we request a stay of that order pending appeal. The production of these confidential business documents could cause irreparable harm to my client's business interests. Motion denied. 30 days, Mr. Thornton. If your client has nothing to hide, the production shouldn't be a problem. Judge Morrison made a note in her file. Furthermore, given these new allegations about Mr. Hartwell's financial situation, I'm ordering an independent forensic accounting of both the marital assets and Mr. Hartwell's business. The cost will be split between the parties initially, with final allocation to be determined based on the findings. We'll reconvene in 60 days for a status conference after the accounting is complete. She banged her gavel, and the hearing was over. But as we stood to leave, I saw Julian lean over and whisper something urgently to Marcus Thornton. Thornton's expression darkened, and he shook his head firmly. Whatever Julian had just suggested, his own attorney was rejecting it. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Patricia was pleased but cautious. This is good, she told Natalie. The forensic accounting will uncover whatever he's been hiding. But be prepared. Cornered animals are dangerous, and Julian is definitely feeling cornered right now. He's going to escalate. How much worse can it get? Natalie asked tiredly. Patricia and I exchanged a glance. We were both thinking the same thing. It could get a lot worse. And we were about to find out just how much worse. The forensic accountant. The forensic accountant assigned to the case was a woman named Dr. Helena Kowalski. She had a PhD in accounting from Stanford, specialized in fraud examination, and had testified as an expert witness in over 200 cases. Patricia told us that having someone of Dr. Kowalski's caliber assigned to the case was actually fortunate. Judges trusted her findings implicitly. Dr. Kowalski requested mountains of documents from both sides. Bank statements, tax returns, credit card statements, business contracts, payroll records, everything. Julian's attorney fought every request, but Judge Morrison ordered compliance, threatening sanctions if Julian didn't cooperate fully. I watched as Natalie gathered her portion of the documents. It was straightforward: joint bank statements, credit card bills, mortgage documents, her small retirement account from her years working at the gallery. Her financial life was an open book, simple and honest. Julian's production, by contrast, was a nightmare. He submitted over 10,000 pages of documents, many of them seemingly random and irrelevant. Construction permits from 2015. Email chains about concrete suppliers. Spreadsheets with no context or explanation. It was a classic document dump designed to bury the relevant information in an avalanche of useless paper. But Dr. Kowalski was not impressed or deterred. She'd seen this tactic before. She sent a sharp letter to Marcus Thornton demanding organized, properly labeled, and complete financial records within 10 days, or she would report the non-compliance to Judge Morrison. Julian produced better organized records, though I suspected he was still hiding things. 3 weeks into her analysis, Dr. Kowalski requested a meeting with Patricia, Natalie, and me. We gathered in Patricia's conference room on a gray October afternoon. Dr. Kowalski was a small woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind rimless glasses. She had the air of someone who was extremely intelligent and not accustomed to tolerating nonsense. I'm still completing my full analysis, she said, opening a laptop and pulling up a presentation. But I wanted to share some preliminary findings because they're significant enough that they may impact your legal strategy. She clicked to the first slide, which showed a flow chart of money moving between various accounts. Mr. Hartwell's financial situation is complex, deliberately so in my opinion. He has at least 15 different bank accounts across multiple institutions. Money flows between these accounts in patterns that appear designed to obscure the source and use of funds. She clicked to the next slide. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Hartwell has received approximately $12.7 million in investor funding for various development projects. Of that amount, only about $4.2 million can be clearly traced to legitimate project expenses like land purchases, construction costs, and professional services. That leaves approximately $8.5 million that has been diverted to other purposes. Natalie gasped. $8.5 million? Where did it go? Dr. Kowalski's expression was grim. That's where it gets interesting. Of that $8.5 million, approximately $2.1 million went to what I would classify as personal expenses. Direct transfers to Mr. Hartwell's personal accounts, which were then used for luxury purchases, travel, gifts, and other personal expenditures including the affair-related expenses already documented. Another $1.7 million went to paying off earlier investors, which suggests a Ponzi-type scheme where new investment money is used to pay returns to old investors rather than being used for the stated purpose. She clicked to another slide showing a timeline. The remaining $4.7 million was moved to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Panama. These transfers occurred over the past 18 months, with the largest transfers happening in the 3 months before Mrs. Morrison filed for divorce. The room was silent. Even Patricia, who'd been practicing family law for 20 years, looked shocked. He moved $5 million offshore right before the divorce? Patricia said finally. That's not just hiding assets. That's international money laundering. Dr. Kowalski nodded. In my professional opinion, yes. And there's more. Mr. Hartwell has been drawing a salary from his business of approximately $300,000 per year, which he reported on his tax returns and disclosed in this case. However, he's also been taking what I would call disguised distributions, having the company pay for his car lease, his apartment rent, his country club membership, expensive meals and travel, all of which are classified as business expenses but are actually personal benefits. When you add it all up, his true annual compensation is closer to $550,000 to $600,000 per year. Natalie looked like she might be sick. He told the court he could barely afford to pay support. He said his business was struggling and he was living on a modest income. He lied, Dr. Kowalski said simply. Repeatedly and systematically. And the forensic evidence proves it beyond any doubt. Patricia was already making notes, her pen flying across her legal pad. This changes everything. We're not just talking about a contentious divorce anymore. We're talking about fraud, perjury, money laundering, theft. Julian is facing serious criminal exposure. What happens now? I asked. Patricia looked up from her notes. Now we go back to court with this information. We file an emergency motion to freeze all of Julian's accounts, including the offshore ones. We request that Judge Morrison refer this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. We demand full disclosure of all assets and ask the court to sanction Julian for his perjury and fraud on the court. She looked at Natalie. And we make it very clear to Marcus Thornton that if Julian doesn't immediately come clean about everything and settle this case fairly, we're going to make sure he faces the full consequences of his criminal behavior. Dr. Kowalski closed her laptop. I'll have my full report completed within 2 weeks. But I wanted you to have this preliminary information because time is of the essence. In cases like this, once the perpetrator realizes they've been caught, they often attempt to move additional assets or flee the jurisdiction. You need to act quickly. As we left the meeting, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because we now had proof that everything Natalie had said was true, that Julian had been lying and stealing and manipulating everyone around him. But sadness because this was my son we were talking about. The baby I'd held and loved had grown into a man who was capable of stealing millions of dollars and destroying lives without apparent remorse. That evening, I sat in my kitchen and tried to reconcile the Julian I'd raised with the Julian described in Dr. Kowalski's report. How does a person become so corrupt? Was it something I'd done wrong as a mother? Had I missed opportunities to correct his behavior when he was young? Had my enabling of his small childhood lies paved the way for these massive adult frauds? I didn't have answers. But I knew one thing with certainty: whatever happened next, I was going to make sure Julian faced the consequences of his actions. Not because I wanted to hurt my son, but because it was the only way he might ever learn that actions have consequences and that he couldn't lie and cheat his way through life forever. The next morning, Patricia filed her emergency motions. And that's when Julian made the decision that would ultimately lead to his downfall in the most dramatic way possible. He decided to get desperate. The emergency hearing was scheduled for November 3rd, exactly 2 weeks after Dr. Kowalski's bombshell revelation. Patricia had filed a comprehensive motion supported by the forensic accountant's preliminary report, requesting immediate freezing of all Julian's accounts, sanctions for perjury and fraud on the court, increased support payments based on his true income, and referral to the district attorney for criminal investigation. The night before the hearing, Patricia called with a warning. "Margaret, I need you to prepare yourself and Natalie for tomorrow. Julian is backed into a corner with no good options. Men like him, men who've spent their whole lives manipulating and controlling situations, they don't handle powerlessness well. He's going to do something. I don't know what, but he's going to try something." "What do you mean?" I asked, though a cold feeling was already spreading through my chest. I've been doing this for 23 years. I've seen desperate people do desperate things. Some try to flee the country. Some try to intimidate witnesses. Some try to destroy evidence. Julian has already proven he's willing to lie, cheat, and steal. Tomorrow, when he walks into that courtroom and realizes the evidence against him is overwhelming, he's going to panic. Just be ready. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about Patricia's warning, kept imagining different scenarios. Would Julian try to run? Would he become violent? Would he try to take the children and disappear? Every possibility seemed both unlikely and terrifyingly possible. The next morning, I picked up Natalie from her house. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes testament to her own sleepless night. Emma, Christopher, and Sophie were staying with Natalie's friend from the school where she taught, kept safely away from the courthouse drama. "How are you holding up?" I asked as she got into my car. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of losing any more. Patricia says the evidence is overwhelming. I'm scared of what Julian might do when he realizes he's lost." "He's never lost before, Margaret." "Not really. He's always talked his way out of everything. But this time, there's no talking his way out." We arrived at the Multnomah County Courthouse 40 minutes before the hearing. Patricia was already there, along with Dr. Kowalski, who would be testifying about her findings. We gathered in a small conference room near the courtroom to review the strategy one final time. "The hearing should be straightforward," Patricia explained. "Dr. Kowalski will present her findings. I'll argue for the relief we've requested. Thornton will try to create doubt or delay, but the evidence speaks for itself. Judge Morrison will likely grant most if not all of our requests." "And then what happens to Julian?" Natalie asked quietly. "Then the district attorney's office will decide whether to file criminal charges. Based on what we've uncovered, I'd say charges are almost certain. Wire fraud, money laundering, theft by deception. We're looking at multiple felonies with significant prison time if he's convicted." At exactly 10 a.m., we entered the courtroom. Judge Morrison's courtroom was more formal than some of the others I'd been in, with dark wood paneling, high ceilings, and an imposing bench where the judge sat elevated above everyone else. The room was already filling with people, court staff, other attorneys waiting for their cases, and a few people I didn't recognize who I assumed were journalists tipped off about the high-profile case. Julian arrived 5 minutes later with Marcus Thornton. My son looked terrible. He'd lost even more weight, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. His face was pale and drawn, with deep shadows under his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he sat down at the defendant's table. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, he looked frightened. Thornton, by contrast, maintained his professional composure, but there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested even he knew this was not going well for his client. Judge Morrison entered, and we all stood. She settled into her seat, opened the file in front of her, and looked out over the courtroom with her sharp, intelligent eyes. "This is the matter of Morrison versus Hartwell, case number DR 2024-8847. We're here on Mrs. Morrison's emergency motion regarding newly discovered financial information. Ms. Chen, you may proceed. Patricia stood, and I could see the confidence in her posture. This was her element. Thank you, Your Honor. The petitioner has uncovered evidence of massive financial fraud perpetrated by Mr. Hartwell, both against his investors and against this court. With the court's permission, I'd like to call Dr. Helena Kowalski to present her findings. Dr. Kowalski took the witness stand and was sworn in. For the next 45 minutes, she methodically presented her analysis. She used charts and graphs projected on a screen, walking the judge through the complex web of financial transactions. Money flowing from investors into Julian's accounts. Money being diverted to personal expenses and offshore accounts. The disguised distributions that doubled his reported income. The Ponzi scheme structure of using new investor money to pay old investors. Judge Morrison asked pointed questions throughout, and Dr. Kowalski answered each one with precision and clarity. I watched Julian as his financial crimes were laid bare in excruciating detail. He sat rigid in his chair, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jumping in his cheek. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. When Dr. Kowalski finished, Patricia presented additional evidence: the articles about investor complaints, the notice of the contractor's license review, the liens against Julian's company. She laid out a timeline showing how Julian had accelerated the offshore transfers right before the divorce was filed, demonstrating consciousness of guilt. Your Honor, Patricia concluded, Mr. Hartwell has perpetrated a fraud not only on his investors but on this court. He has lied repeatedly about his income and assets. He has hidden millions of dollars to avoid his obligations to his wife and children. He has perjured himself in sworn testimony. We're requesting that the court impose the maximum sanctions available, freeze all assets, dramatically increase support payments based on his true income, and refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Marcus Thornton stood to respond, but for the first time since I'd met him, he seemed uncertain. Your Honor, we dispute many of the interpretations and conclusions drawn by Mrs. Chen and Dr. Kowalski. These are complex business transactions that require context and understanding of the development industry. We request additional time to prepare our own financial expert to review these allegations. Thornton leaned down and whispered urgently with Julian. I saw Julian shake his head firmly. Thornton straightened. No, Your Honor. We'll reserve testimony for a later date. Very well. Based on the evidence presented, I'm making the following findings and orders. Judge Morrison began reading from notes she'd been taking. I find that Mr. Hartwell has deliberately and systematically lied to this court about his financial situation. I find that he has hidden marital assets and diverted funds to offshore accounts in anticipation of these divorce proceedings. I find that his testimony in previous hearings constituted perjury. Julian's breathing was getting faster. I could see his chest rising and falling rapidly even from where I sat several rows back. His face had gone from pale to an unhealthy grayish color. Therefore, I'm ordering the immediate freezing of all accounts controlled by Mr. Hartwell, including the offshore accounts identified by Dr. Kowalski. I'm ordering Mr. Hartwell to pay child support in the amount of $6,500 per month and spousal support in the amount of $4,000 per month, based on his true income as established by Dr. Kowalski's analysis. I'm awarding primary custody of the minor children to Mrs. Morrison, with Mr. Hartwell to have supervised visitation only until such time as. That's when it happened. Julian suddenly stood up, swayed slightly, and clutched at his chest. His face contorted in what looked like agony. I can't breathe, he gasped. My chest, it hurts. He staggered backward, knocking his chair over, and collapsed to the floor. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Marcus Thornton dropped to his knees beside Julian. Call 911, he shouted. He's having a heart attack. Judge Morrison immediately called a recess and ordered the bailiff to get medical help. Within seconds, courthouse security rushed in, followed quickly by emergency medical personnel who happened to be in the building for another matter. I watched from my seat, frozen in shock, as paramedics surrounded my son. They were checking his pulse, his breathing, asking him questions. Julian was clutching his chest, his face twisted in pain, gasping for air. One paramedic called for a stretcher while another prepared an oxygen mask. Natalie gripped my hand tightly. "Oh my God, Margaret. Is he really having a heart attack?" But something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but something about the scene felt off. I'd seen my husband Robert have a real heart attack 12 years ago, right before he died. This didn't look quite the same. Julian's color was wrong. His breathing pattern was wrong. And his eyes, even in apparent distress, kept darting around the courtroom, watching everyone's reactions. Patricia leaned over to us and whispered urgently, "Don't say anything, but I think he's faking." "What?" Natalie whispered back, her voice incredulous. "Watch his left hand. The one the paramedics can't see because he's clutching his chest. It's not trembling or showing any sign of real distress. And look at his face when he thinks no one's watching. The expression changes." I looked more carefully, and Patricia was right. When the paramedics were focused on taking his blood pressure or asking him questions, Julian's face showed exaggerated pain. But in the brief moments when their attention was elsewhere, his expression shifted, became more calculated, less agonized. The paramedics were preparing to transport him to the hospital. "We need to take him to Emmanuel Medical Center for evaluation," the lead paramedic told Judge Morrison. "He's reporting chest pain and shortness of breath. We can't rule out cardiac event." "Of course, do whatever you need to do," Judge Morrison said. She looked shaken, as anyone would be watching someone collapse in their courtroom. "Mr. Thornton, obviously we'll continue this hearing once we know Mr. Hartwell's medical condition." Marcus Thornton nodded, but I noticed he was watching Julian with an odd expression. Suspicion? Doubt? It was hard to tell. They loaded Julian onto a stretcher and began wheeling him out of the courtroom. As they passed our row, Julian's eyes met mine for just a fraction of a second. And in that brief moment, I saw the truth. There was no fear of death in those eyes. There was calculation. Relief. He thought he'd just bought himself a way out. As soon as the courtroom doors closed behind the paramedics, Patricia turned to us. "We need to act fast. Judge Morrison, may we approach?" The three of us, Patricia, Natalie, and I, approached the bench. Judge Morrison looked at us with concern. "Ms. Chen, what is it?" "Your Honor, I have reason to believe Mr. Hartwell is faking this medical emergency to delay these proceedings and possibly to create sympathy." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, Ms. Chen." "I understand, Your Honor. But consider the timing. Right as you were issuing devastating orders against him, right as criminal referral was being discussed, he suddenly has a medical emergency. And if I may point out, I observed his behavior carefully. His symptoms don't match a genuine cardiac event. What are you requesting?" "I'm requesting that the court order independent medical evaluation, not just treatment at whatever hospital he chooses. And I'm requesting that the court's orders remain in effect unless and until genuine medical evidence proves he's incapacitated. He shouldn't be able to stop these proceedings just by claiming illness." Judge Morrison was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Ms. Chen, I can't ignore a potential medical emergency. However, you make valid points about the timing. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm issuing all the orders I announced before Mr. Hartwell's collapse. They take effect immediately. If Mr. Hartwell wants those orders modified based on medical incapacity, he can file a motion with supporting documentation from a court-appointed physician. And I'm still making the criminal referral to the district attorney. This hearing is continued for 2 weeks to allow time for medical evaluation and to give the DA time to review the case." "Thank you, Your Honor." As we left the courtroom, Patricia was already making phone calls. "I'm calling a contact I have at Emmanuel Medical Center. We're going to find out exactly what Julian's medical condition is." The hospital investigation. 2 hours later, Patricia called with news. "You were right. He's faking." We were at a coffee shop near the courthouse, Natalie and I drinking tea we couldn't taste, too anxious to do anything but wait. Patricia's call felt like a lifeline. How do you know? I asked. My contact at the hospital checked his medical records. They can access them through the court case connection. Julian was admitted for observation, but all his tests are normal. EKG normal. Blood work normal. Blood pressure slightly elevated but not dangerously so. Chest X-ray normal. The attending physician's notes indicate patient reports chest pain and shortness of breath, but objective findings don't support acute cardiac event. Recommend observation and psychiatric evaluation. Psychiatric evaluation? The doctor suspects panic attack or malingering. That's the medical term for faking illness. But here's the interesting part. My contact did some more digging. Julian was seen checking his phone repeatedly, texting someone, and was overheard on the phone talking to Marcus Thornton about how long he could stay in the hospital to delay things. Natalie closed her eyes. He's faking a heart attack to get out of facing consequences. Just like he's faked everything else in his life. Exactly. And he's about to find out it doesn't work. I'm filing an emergency motion with Judge Morrison first thing tomorrow morning, including an affidavit from my hospital contact about Julian's true condition. We're going to request that he be held in contempt of court for attempting to obstruct justice. But Patricia wasn't done. There's something else. Remember Dr. Kowalski mentioned that Julian had been moving money around? Well, my investigator discovered that he made electronic transfers this morning, before the hearing. He moved another $300,000 from a business account to an offshore account. At 6 a.m. this morning, knowing he had a court hearing at 10 a.m. where his finances would be exposed. He was planning to run, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He was moving money so he could flee the country. That's exactly what the DA is going to argue. And attempting to flee is going to make his situation so much worse. The next morning, Patricia filed her motion with Judge Morrison, including detailed medical records proving Julian's heart attack was fake. The judge was not pleased. She issued an order requiring Julian to appear in court the following day, regardless of claimed medical condition unless he is genuinely hospitalized in intensive care with a documented life-threatening condition. Julian was discharged from the hospital that afternoon. According to Patricia's sources, he tried to convince the doctors to keep him for observation, claiming he still felt chest pain, but the attending physician had firmly stated there was no medical reason for continued hospitalization. The reconvened hearing was scheduled for November 10 at 9 a.m. This time, Patricia warned everyone, Julian would have no escape routes left. The final confrontation. The courtroom was packed for the reconvened hearing. Word had gotten out about Julian's fake heart attack, and several journalists were present. I recognized reporters from the Oregonian and Willamette Week. This had become a public spectacle. Julian arrived looking defeated. Gone was any pretense of confidence or control. He walked into the courtroom like a man heading to his execution, shoulders slumped, face ashen. Marcus Thornton was with him, but even the aggressive attorney looked subdued. Judge Morrison entered, and her expression was cold fury. Mr. Hartwell, before we continue with the substantive issues in this case, I want to address your behavior at our last hearing. You collapsed and claimed to be having a heart attack, causing a major disruption to these proceedings. Subsequently, medical records prove you had no cardiac emergency. Would you like to explain yourself? Julian stood slowly. Your Honor, I was having a panic attack. I've been under tremendous stress, and when I heard your rulings, I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dying. Mr. Hartwell, panic attacks are real and serious medical conditions. However, the medical records indicate something different. They indicate that you were malingering, faking symptoms to delay these proceedings. Is that accurate? Marcus Thornton tried to intervene. Your Honor, my client was genuinely distressed. Mr. Thornton, I'm asking your client, not you. Mr. Hartwell? Julian's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Finally, he whispered, I just needed time. Time for what, Mr. Hartwell? Time to move more money offshore? Time to flee the jurisdiction? Time to destroy evidence? Judge Morrison's voice was sharp. Because evidence has been presented that on the morning of our last hearing, you made electronic transfers of over $300,000 to offshore accounts. That suggests premeditation, not panic. Julian said nothing. He just stood there, his lies finally catching up to him with nowhere left to run. I am finding you in contempt of court for your deliberate attempt to obstruct these proceedings. I'm imposing a fine of $10,000, and I'm ordering you to spend 3 days in county jail. Furthermore, all of my previous orders stand. Custody to Mrs. Morrison. Support payments as ordered. All assets frozen. And I'm making an immediate referral to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for criminal prosecution. She looked at Julian with something like pity mixed with disgust. Mr. Hartwell, you've lied to your wife, your investors, and this court. You've stolen millions of dollars. You've perjured yourself repeatedly. You've attempted to manipulate the legal system. And when none of that worked, you faked a medical emergency. You brought this on yourself through your own choices. Bailiff, take Mr. Hartwell into custody. The bailiff approached Julian, who looked like he might collapse again, this time for real. Marcus Thornton stepped forward. Your Honor, we request bail pending appeal. Denied. 3 days, Mr. Thornton. Your client will survive. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Mrs. Morrison, you're free to take your children home. They're safe now. As the bailiff led Julian away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one more time. Our eyes met across the crowded courtroom. I saw in his face a mixture of emotions, anger, fear, shame, and something that might have been regret. But it was too late for regret. Far too late. Natalie turned to me, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief. Is it really over? Patricia smiled. The divorce part is over. You won. The criminal part is just beginning, but that's not your fight anymore. You and the kids can move forward with your lives. Epilogue, 6 months later. It's been 6 months since that final court hearing, and I'm sitting in my garden on a warm May afternoon, watching my grandchildren play. Emma is teaching Sophie how to plant tomato seedlings. Christopher is trying to catch a butterfly with a net. They're laughing, the sound of children who are healing. Natalie is inside making lemonade, settling into her new life. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. She got the house, full custody, the support payments, and a substantial portion of the marital assets once they were finally untangled from Julian's web of deception. She's gone back to school part-time to finish her master's degree in art history. She's even started dating someone, a kind middle school teacher named Robert who treats her with the respect she deserves. Julian is in prison, awaiting trial on 15 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and theft. His bail was set at $2 million, which he couldn't make because all his assets were frozen. The trial is scheduled for August. His attorney, no longer Marcus Thornton, who withdrew from the case when Julian couldn't pay his fees, says Julian is looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison if convicted. The investors are suing him in civil court. Cassandra Reeves, the assistant he'd been having an affair with, testified against him in exchange for immunity. It turns out she'd been helping him cook the books and knew about the offshore accounts. When she realized he was going to prison and taking her with him, she made a deal with prosecutors.